Ability is your ability to transform technology into something useful. That has not atrophied. I'm more excited about the new grad cohort than I've ever been. If you don't know how a Bloom filter works, you would have struggled before and you will continue to struggle because you will guide an agent towards the wrong solution by trying to describe what you want it to do, and it'll follow your words. I'm so aligned with that idea. If you can move quickly, you can make changes quickly, you can get to good. I built an attack back feature which got us shut down by the FBI, and that was pretty fun. Karpathy says English is the most important programming language. If you're not good at writing and reading, you're going to struggle just as much as if you're not good at understanding algorithms and data structures. You have to understand all of these things, and I think you're limitless. You contain multitudes. It's not one thing. You are all of these things. Your sense of accomplishment and success should be driven by what matters to you.
So today I'm talking with Lindsay Simon, who's currently a VP of Engineering at Vercel. We talk about everything from studying philosophy in college to his first job at a newspaper to basically inventing modern infrastructure as a service at Google on the App Engine team. Finally, we talk about the future of software development and how software engineering is going to look a lot different from how it was just a few years ago. How we're going from software engineers to generalist builders. Hope you like it.
You studied philosophy, English, and computer science, right, in college?
I studied a wide array of things.
Okay.
I was in a program at UT Austin called Plan 2, which Plan 2 is intentionally designed as a non-specific major in the liberal arts school. But many people, you would minor in several other things, but you got your degree in Plan 2. And it had a core curriculum of classes like, you had to take a physics class, but it was one physics class with the dean of the physics department at the biggest state school. It was incredible.
Yeah.
Professor Gleason was my physics professor and was just a phenomenal thinker and multidisciplinary learner.
Yeah.
So,
why did you want to study those three?
I loved philosophy for the process of logic development, and there's a lot of endorphins you get out of discovering branches and anti-proofs prove truth here, and then you move down. The way logic problems are solved is sort of like top down. You're kind of coming up with these things, and it ends up looking a lot like programming actually, and it's actually very relevant to how I think we'll be programming going forward. But in any case, that was very fun for me. I loved it. And then physics, I wanted to know how things worked. Logic was a good cross applicant there. And then, one way I loved computers, but I wanted to know how they worked. So computer science was a thing you could take class in. But I didn't focus on computer science in school. I had a pretty broad focus.
I see.
I wrote my thesis paper on the science fiction writer Philip K. Dick. So, as weird facts, it was pretty multidisciplinary.
Yeah. So if you like logic, why philosophy versus math?
For me, it was never one or the other. I was not willing to decide that I liked one of these things more than another. So I wanted to kind of study all of them.
Yeah.
And see how I could apply things from one to the other.
Looking back, how would you say that has shaped what you've worked on since college?
I think because I didn't focus, I didn't really know what I was going to do or want to do professionally.
Yeah.
And that kind of gave me the freedom to think you could figure out what that wanted to be and then go explore it. And so when I got into, my first job was really in publishing. I worked at the weekly newspaper in Austin called the Austin Chronicle, which was also responsible for South by Southwest.
Oh, nice.
And so I was involved in all sorts of things. And so I didn't think there was an area of that job that I had to stick to. I started in advertising. I was an advertising assistant. In fact, my job was initially to drive around and collect money from advertisers.
Oh, wow.
So, I learned how the business worked, but I was mostly intrigued by the process of publishing and writing. I thought those were the romantic parts, but then I actually my jobs were in the business side.
Yeah.
And so, gradually I ended up getting involved in technology there because it was an opportunity and I was interested in it. And so, I think probably that breadth of things that I studied helped me to not think that I needed to focus. I could do anything.
Yeah. Do you think that held you back like early on? Because I've noticed like myself being, and like some of my early bosses, they would tell me being a generalist like early on in your career is kind of it kind of like slows you down because you can't say like, I'm a software engineer,
Right.
I'm this, I'm that. You just say like, if someone asks you what do you do, you're just kind of like, I just kind of do everything.
Yeah. At that time, if I wanted to not be held back, the path in technology jobs was get a Microsoft certification. But that isn't what was interesting to me. I was interested in the GNU Manifesto and free software and building my own machines. So actually, over time, I ended up becoming the webmaster for the Austin Chronicle for many years.
Yeah.
And like, what is that job? You tell me, but nobody really knows. So it's like the perfect generalist job. I did hardware, software, business systems, ran mail servers, ran our accounting software. It wasn't like one thing. And then once and actually at the same time I was teaching high school because there was a high school near to the Austin Chronicle, and I was intrigued by the idea of teaching.
Teaching what?
Computer science.
Oh, okay, cool.
Because at that point I had learned enough to where I was scared to do it, but I thought it would be fun to teach younger folks, things about programming that I found interesting. And I was scared to death that they were going to run circles around me, actually. But then it wasn't like that.
Okay, so you were working at the Austin Chronicle, and then where do you go from there?
Yeah, I went to startups. I went to a network security startup where they hosted an event called Linux Top Gun. The Linux Top Gun was you signed up and you showed up in an auditorium. There was a big computer, a box computer, sitting on the stage, and you had 10 minutes to take this random unknown distribution of Linux and try to secure it before everyone in the audience tried to hack it. They would turn on the network, and all the kids from the 2600 Club were sitting there with like a big Wi-Fi satellite to try and DDoS the hell out of your machine. And so you would win if you could keep the machine online for 5 minutes.
Interesting. Wow. So you were doing that, and then, sorry.
Then I went to work for the company that sponsored
okay.
Linux Top Gun.
Wow.
And it was called Symbiote, and they built a piece of software that based on, they would detect packets coming into a network for vulnerability matches, early on, based on the Snort protocol. Snort was sort of a hack on top of the Linux kernel to look at the early part of a TCP frame and detect, this is actually malicious traffic. And then what we did was try to detect whether that traffic was actually targeting your network or if it was just random script kiddies. And what I built was the Flash interface on top of all of this data to visualize like Star Wars, like the world on one side and your computers on the other side, and mapped, based on their type and their software. And so, we would show like laser beams going back and forth. And then I built an attack back feature, which got us shut down by the FBI, and that was pretty fun.
Wait, so it was like a visual thing?
It was visual.
Oh,
yeah, it was visual.
Why?
Because we thought it was a good sales thing to have a visual UI for, you can see who's trying to attack you. You can look up, where are they coming from? What are they trying to do? Is it a high quality attack? Meaning, are they attacking an IIS server version 9.2, but you're only running Apache? So then, kind of irrelevant, it's not interesting. But if something is actually targeting a vulnerable piece of software that you have, then, sort of your credibility score goes down. And we thought we were going to sell customers a credibility score, kind of like a credit score, to tell them how safe their network is based on how vulnerable they were to actual bad traffic.
Who would be the person monitoring that?
The customer.
Like, who was the customer?
Oil companies, among others. Like, we were in Texas, so our biggest customer was a Houston-based oil company that wanted to monitor their internal systems for getting hacked.
So they would be like software engineers, like looking at this stuff?
No, we're talking like big belt buckles, and and but they had computers. They were technologists, but they weren't software engineers.
I see. Interesting. And then from there, where did you go?
Yeah, I worked at a couple other startups, but in Austin. One of the last one I worked at, the CTO of the company convinced me that I was not fulfilling the dream that he saw for me, which was that I needed to start writing about what I was doing. I was doing a lot of performance testing and browser calculation of how fast certain operations were. So actually I was testing DOM transformation in browsers and trying to record it and ways to hack it. Like, is setting inner HTML faster than DOM manipulation? Should you maybe use XSLT to do that DOM manipulation instead? And so I started publishing my research on that into a blog called Ajaxian, which was the highest, it was sort of the holy grail of if you wrote a good blog piece and it got featured on Ajaxian, you would get a lot of traffic and, and it felt like a thing. And so that was my goal. And it did happen. And then after a while, I got flown out to Silicon Valley to interview at some startups and Yahoo and then ultimately Google. And by the time I got to Google, I was convinced I had nothing to lose. I had been through the Silicon Valley ringer for the first time.
Yeah.
My interviews in Texas were like steak dinner with the CEO. And then my interviews in Silicon Valley were, write all the algorithms to produce a chess game.
Yeah.
And so it was
like whiteboard interviews.
Yeah, I was just not prepared initially. And so, but I think I got lucky in my Google interview. I did very well and I knew it. And so did my interviewer. And then I had this amazing experience where I got moved out here by Google to work there.
And at Google, what were you working on?
Probably the most relevant thing to what I'm doing now is that I was doing UX office hours and I met the product manager for this new thing. It was like 5 people building a thing called App Engine. And they wanted to pass UI review. And so I was there to help them figure out how to do that. And then the PM was like, well, why don't you just come work on this project? And I was like, well, I don't know. You'd have to talk to my boss. And he's like, we can make that happen. So turns out Brett Taylor was the lead engineer along with a guy named Kevin Gibbs for App Engine at Google. And they could make it happen. So next thing you know, I'm on the App Engine team and I'm in building 41, which is like the building with Larry and Sergey and the dinosaur. And I'm sitting with, these, and I started to look up who these people were on this team and they were all just outstanding, incredible software engineers. Many of them had come from Stanford and all of a sudden I'm sitting with the creme de la creme at Google building, before the word cloud was really, it was just starting to come on, we were building a system to help make deploying web things easy and autoscale. And it was so energizing.
Yeah.
And it was almost, it was very hard for Google to figure out what to do with this project, but it still exists.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun to work on.
What were like some of the challenges you guys were trying to solve with App Engine? Because now you're working at Vercel,
right?
Which obviously is
obviously connected. Everything from the thing is we had to spend a lot of, this is pre-Kubernetes and pre-Git. So how do you get code off your machine into Google infrastructure and then run it on runtimes, Java, Python, C, primarily, that are safe? They're sharing potentially, landscape with Google things. Like how do you do that? How do you sandbox these runtimes? So you're in a Python runtime, you can't break out and run C code. How do we make that possible? So we spent a lot of time building sandbox runtimes for App Engine. More time doing that than working on developer experience.
Yeah.
And Heroku started at the same exact time and picked up, had a pretty different kind of model for that and did focus on developer experience. And I think, the growth and sort of acceleration of Heroku's platform was a consequence of that, not better technology.
Yeah. Was App Engine mostly focused on Python infrastructure?
We're primarily focused on that. There was also a lot of Java and a little bit of C, but it was mostly Python.
And Python was pretty new around then, no?
I don't know if it was new. It was one of the 3 deemed languages at Google that you could build in production with.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't actually very long before I was working with Guido van Rossum on that team. So I'm working with the father of Python on the Python projects, and we were all our demos were in Python. All of our examples, like most of the projects were in Python.
Interesting, because now you're at Vercel, which is mostly JavaScript based, right?
Yeah. But we also have a small but mighty Python team.
Yeah. You guys are I guess do you have something in beta for running Python?
It's not in beta. It's available. You can do it now, and you always could. It just wasn't. It was just kind of you would hit rough corners too easily, and so we're improving that dramatically.
So how did you meet Brett Slacken?
Brett Slacken. So he was also on the App Engine team.
Oh, wow.
So initially, Yeah, it was Brett Taylor, Kevin Gibbs, Ken Ashcraft, Brett Slatkin, a couple other folks. And anyway, Brett was on that team, and Brett was, his throughput and his capability was just mind blowing. And we thought a lot alike about, I felt like, the joy of getting things on the web and making that really easy was super compelling. And so we worked together a couple of times on a couple of different projects. One of, after App Engine, he built a thing called Google Consumer Surveys within Google as part of his first early inside Google startup program that didn't last very long. But the idea was to incubate a couple of companies. This is before Google X too. And one of them was Google Consumer Surveys. And the idea was, how do you do monetization on the web to enable publishers to publish things, but not just do straight up ads? So we built a product that would run surveys. And so you could buy the ability to run surveys across the world and get data back. And so you were basically subsidizing something like a very, very dynamic ad. And then the product underneath it had the brilliance of another engineer, Jeremy Ginsberg, who had built Flu Trends at Google. He wrote a lot of the ML pipeline to do insights. The product was amazing.
Yeah.
It was truly incredible.
Did that turn into, that sounds like Google Forms-ish?
No, it was different. I mean, it looked like Google Forms. Yeah. The creation process looked similar. But no, now what you'd probably see of it is like, if you're on Google search and you get a sort of pop-up in the corner, it's like, hey, did this search work for you? That's sort of the simplest form of the survey. And so it's built on the survey pipeline that they built. And so that was by far the biggest customer. It was internal Google.
Yeah.
And so I worked on that when I went to go work on the product because it was a huge surface area to help research and improve Google.
Interesting. And how did you monetize that again?
Well, so if you wanted to consider building a health spa in Los Gatos, you'd be like, okay, I want to know, are people interested in more nutritional health or skincare? And you could run a survey in Los Gatos to ask people before they go to a Newsweek article, hey, are you currently more interested in one of these things?
Yeah.
And they would answer. And so then after a day, you'd get the summarized result with insights like, oh, it turns out, men aged 21 to 26 said yes 35% more times than other cohorts to this question. And so you could decide whether your idea had legs, among other things, or you could get really interesting demographic data.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Out of it.
And you would pay based on like someone completing the form, basically. Yeah. Okay. Nice.
You pay for 500 responses. You were paying for statistical significance.
Yeah.
So that may be 200 questions. It depended how broadly you wanted to go and how closely you wanted to target.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. One of the other projects I think you worked on with Brett was it like DP?
Depicted.
Depicted. That's how you pronounce it. Okay.
Depicted.
Yeah, and that's
Brett started it.
Yeah, and that's kind of related to maybe what you're doing now with Dev 3000.
It's all connected. It's all connected.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of Depicted was that, and so 402, the Google Consumer Surveys product, had this system set up with Google internal tech so that when you had a PR, or you wanted to release, you wanted to push to production, we didn't do like CI/CD where every push went to production. You would say, okay, I'm ready to push to production. I want my thing to go live. So you're going to have like 10 commits, and it would run visual diff against current production and against the current state. And so you would know, did I create differences visually across 150 pages? And if you didn't, great. That was one element. It had to pass a bunch of tests too, but then you had visual tests. Like,
this is like a front end tool.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. So you'd be in a browser and say, okay, cool. No unintended visual diffs I can release. And so you kind of knew you weren't going to break the visuals of the site.
I see.
At least. And I wanted that at my next startup, so I worked with Brett on Depicted because I wanted the same system. Visual diff is a really powerful tool to help debug and to make sure you don't inadvertently break things.
Yeah, and that was an open source project, yeah?
It was, yeah. It was an open source project. I gave a talk about it, and in the context of React. So at that startup, I had left Google because I was convinced that React was going to matter. And it was going to matter a lot more than the tech that I was working on at Google with, Polymer and web components and things. I mean, I love web standards, and I thought that React had the sauce.
Yeah.
And I was building something along with a couple of other colleagues from Google at that time. A guy named Aaron Boudman, who's a dear friend now, and he kind of once I saw it and started working on it, I was like, oh ho ho ho. So I went to the startup, and we needed to deploy things, and so I wanted to make sure we weren't breaking them. And so
this is after Google?
This is after. There are 2 times I was at Google.
Oh, okay.
So I was there once. I left to go to a startup. I went back to work at Google X, and then I left again to go to a startup. I was really intrigued by the idea of, visual diff and at scale. And so, how do you scale taking these screenshots, and how do you, could you do 150 at the time it takes to just load one page? Could you shard it horozontally that much? Headless browsers started to become a thing at that time.
Yeah.
So, and then there was another company started by another Googler named Percy that now is part of. They got acquired, but it was a product to do that basically. But it was a little different. They were built on top of a different sort of tech than Depicted was. But Depicted was just a fun tool to play with there.
Yeah.
And then I'm still interested in this space. And there's a lot of testing companies now in the business of making it really easy to ensure you're not breaking things visually for your customers.
Yeah.
So it's a really exciting space.
Yeah, how is it, or is it not related to Dev 3000?
Dev 3000 is a way for me to explore AI agent coding.
Yeah.
I got pretty intrigued by the idea of using agents to do something totally unholy. I was trying to take another app of mine and implement service workers and offline support. And at times I dabble in service workers because I want it to work, and I love the idea of offline last. Go to the network first, but if it's not there, don't give me a white empty page. It's like the most unappealing part of the web ecosystem to me. I've already loaded this thing. Show me what I had last time at least. And so I want to make that work. And I was then like, oh, maybe LLMs can help me do it in this context. And the agent would say, okay, cool, go to your browser and copy the network tab and tell me what response it gave you for the service worker file, or what the subsequent caching responses were when trying to go through the service worker. And I realized I was cutting and pasting from the browser back into a terminal over and over again. And every time you do something like that enough times, you're like, what am I doing? I'm better than that. We're computer scientists. We're engineers. We're builders.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be cutting and pasting if you can avoid it. I mean, it's why I liked Perl early on. You could use regular expressions and avoid. Just manipulate things. It's really powerful. So then I got the idea to put to give an agent access to the browser. And so that's really what Dev 3000 is. And it's just a testing ground for me to build an agent that works like I do and experiment with a lot of the Vercel technologies for infrastructure and workflows, sandboxes, learn about learn how agents work. How can I try different ones? My time at Vercel's mostly been as a manager. But for the last year, I've been coding pretty aggressively. If you look at my GitHub profile, you can see the green line.
I saw it.
I mean, me like every other manager in last summer must have been like, what are we doing?
I was looking at your commits. It's like from 2019 to 2022 or 2023, it was 300
pretty
commits
sparse.
a year. And then 2025 hits and you're at 2,000 commits. And right now it's February. We're a month and a half into 26, and you're already at 500 commits.
Well, I mean, it used to be a lot more. I was a very high throughput engineer, but when I went to work at Quip, and after a little while, once I became a manager, I was like, okay, I'm going to take away my most intriguing lever, coding, and see what else I can try to do in a technology company to be useful. Now you've got a team, and so can you make that team productive? Can you help them? Can you enable them? And then you kind of, it's a different thing.
Yeah, what are those things that you would do previously, maybe 2020, 2022, to try to make your team more productive?
I think the function of management is largely an unblocking one. And there's a lot of things you can do to unblock. You can figure out context and then share that context in a concise and high density informational form that is vetted and correct. Versus I could give you really vague information, or I could try to have done some research and give you that and say, hey, this is why we need to build this thing. And now you're armed and ready to go. So, that's one form of unblocking. Now I have engineers who know why we need to build this feature or this capability, and now they are full stop ready to go, and they can own it from there.
Yeah.
So that's one kind of unblocking. Another is, hey, we have to deal with, a security audit. I want to write code. I don't want to do this. I'll do it. I'll figure it out. You take things and you give things.
I see.
And you try to make good judgments about how much to give and how much to take to unblock and enable people.
Did you like that?
I love it.
Okay.
It's so great.
Okay.
It's great. I originally got into programming after I read the GNU Manifesto. I mentioned it earlier because my read on the GNU Manifesto is that the primary good that comes from, coding and building upon others' code and doing things in this space is that you're saving time. If you can save people time, it is a feeling kind of like no other. Sometimes that turns into, you can translate that into dollars, right? But it is the currency that we all share that you can't get back, you can't make up or take down, but you can save people time.
Yeah.
And so, if you're, as a manager, or doing that, that kind of job, if you can save people time, it's awesome.
Yeah. What is the GNU Manifesto?
The GNU Manifesto.
Yeah.
This is the birth of the free software movement. This is Richard Stallman's call to arms around why you needed to make software, make the source code open, but not just open. It needs to be, readable, but also you should be able to take it and manipulate it yourself, so long as you also keep it available and open and free.
Interesting.
And so, free as in software here being, I can go read how the Apache web server works, and I can make my own web server on top of it and call it something else.
Yeah.
But maybe it's different, but it's built on top of this other technology that is available to learn. So if you look at the history there, he was rebuilding Unix commands at the university, and they're like, you can't do that, it's proprietary. You can't distribute it to your colleagues. And he was like, you're kidding me, right? So he quit and started to build a C compiler and ways to ultimately build an operating system. So if you have this computer, if you type ls, you're using GNU software.
Oh, interesting. So that's like the birth of open source software, basically?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And he has a pretty compelling narrative about the difference between open source and free software, but that maybe for another time. but it's something I hold pretty dearly.
Interesting. So after the first time you were at Google, is that when you started Dishola? Is it Dishola?
No, that's before I went to Google. I had to make a choice about taking an investment from a Texas venture capitalist in Austin to build Dishola, which was kind of like a niche form of Yelp. Okay. It was like, Yelp was find restaurants, Dishola was find dishes. Like, where's the best barbacoa breakfast taco in Austin right now?
Okay.
Within 5 miles of where I'm located.
Yeah.
So it was very location centric. The iPhone had not yet come out, but browsers had location GPS, and then phones came out, and this started to become really compelling. And so that was the idea of Dishola. I wanted to build stuff for the service industry folks to be like, okay, who's got the best chantilly cake in New Orleans?
Yeah.
You're there and you're going to get one crawfish etouffee. Where should you go?
Yeah.
That was my idea. Not what's the best restaurant. Where's the best specific thing?
Interesting. And that was after the Austin Chronicle? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like immediately after?
Yeah. That was when I was working at a startup and building this on the side.
I see. So you weren't like full-time on that?
No.
Oh,
I mean,
no.
Mm-mm.
Okay. So that was like
I was never full-time. It was like a choice at that point.
I see.
It was like, do I do this or do I go to Google? And I don't regret that I went to Google.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So like what do you think you learned from building Dishola that has like stuck with you since? I
had to spend so much time sharding the database structures and doing, routing things, scaling VPS to high traffic, fast responses is an infrastructure problem. and I'm not an infrastructure engineer, really. I'm a builder. Turns out, at that time, you really had to be an infrastructure engineer if you wanted to be a builder too. But sort of the,
Because GCP wasn't a thing, or
no, I mean, App Engine wasn't even a thing. And so that's why I was excited about App Engine, because I had learned how to scale this infrastructure for Dishola, take MySQL and shard it and stuff. And I felt like I was, tinkering with the inner guts of computers. And the premise of App Engine was you'd never do that again. You would just write code and Google would autoscale it. You wouldn't manually shard anything. You would ask for a key, it would give you a key. That key would be formatted in a way that enabled App Engine to shard it on top of Bigtable. Super compelling to me. So that was, basically everything I had learned was now useless.
Yeah, okay.
And I was cool with that. It was a little scary because I thought this was interesting knowledge I had, but now it was useless. And great, move on, learn something else.
Yeah.
That's fine.
How long were you working on Dishola for?
Probably 3 or 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And
even while I was at Google, I worked on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How were you doing marketing?
Yeah, in Austin, we did a lot of public marketing. We ran a blog where we would feature restaurants and dishes and people. So we had a lot of content. And we would go out and go to restaurants and award them the golden dish.
Okay.
Basically, the best fish taco in Austin by votes. If you got to 500 votes from people, you got a golden dish.
Interesting.
So it's very similar to what Yelp did, except
Yeah.
I never got it. I never started doing advertising or anything. It didn't get that big.
Yeah. And you say we
There was a group of people. It was me
wow.
and 2 other people. Meredith Maycott, who's amazing, and Laura Kelso. Yeah, and they're both, they're incredible folks. Meredith's a designer and Laura's a journalist and also a technologist.
Yeah. Did you take any learning, non-technical learnings from that experience, or?
Totally. Around what it is to, be a founder, how consuming and frustrating and difficult, and, you've got this vision and you need other people to work like you do, but they're not necessarily going to. And they're not going to think about it the same way, but they are sometimes. It's tough. It's like having a band.
Yeah. Because you have a band, right?
I also have a band. It's similar, right? You want other people to, people can put in what they can, especially if you're not making money. But I think it doesn't actually matter. If you're making money, it's not so different.
Yeah.
You want to make your dream come true, and that may be a technology problem. It may be a marketing problem. It may, the things you have to solve are everything.
Yeah. Do you think any of those learnings have translated to you being a manager? Or
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
What specifically would you say?
I think, it's similar in ways to being a tech lead. When you're responsible for trying to estimate and deliver something, you need to understand the capacities of the people that you're working with. If somebody's currently going through, a personal crisis, now isn't the time to put them over their skis with 20 tasks that you've tried to size up. You might give them 10. And you figure out what people are good at or interested in or where they might want to learn and grow, and you try to distribute those things to them.
Yeah.
And you're trying to orchestrate, getting to some end goal. And so it's very similar. You really need to understand and care about the people around you if, you want to win together.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
So after your first time at Google, when did you end up working at Quip?
Yeah, so that was so if you go look at the background, I tended to go large company, safe, very founding engineer, large company, safe, founding engineer. So I was at a company called Shift Technologies that was in the car space. They were trying to change the experience of buying a car from you go to a dealer and get swindled and messed with to we come to your house and you sign it on an iPad.
Like a Carvana.
Yeah, very similar. They were a competitor.
Oh, wow. They were around.
They were the
primary.
Yeah, they were the primary.
Wow.
They weren't the only competitor. We also had a very irrational competitor down in Palo Alto. But anyway, I was working at that company and I was leaving. And my manager at the time there, I had this conversation with him, what should I do? I'm leaving, right? I'm going to go work at Quip with some of my friends from App Engine team. And, I wasn't even totally, I wasn't a user of Quip at that time. So I didn't actually totally understand the product. But I loved the people. And I'd stayed in touch with them, for years. So and he said, actually, it's a guy named John Vincent, and he works here now. John was like, well, you're a great tech lead, and you can continue to be a great tech lead, or you can try something else. Like take away, I mentioned taking away the high endorphin, like primary lever that I operated with, which was code.
Yeah.
It's like, take it away and see if you can still work with people. And so that was kind of my motivation to go to Quip.
Interesting.
And so I went to work at Quip right when they were acquired. They were acquired by Salesforce.
Yeah.
And at the time, I really wanted to go work at Segment, which was a product I was using at Shift that I was enamored with. And the head of engineering, the VP of engineering there, is a guy named Tito Carrero, who's incredible and has been a good mentor to me. But one 20-minute chat with Brett Taylor, and I was like, I'm going to work with Brett. He's very compelling.
And Segment is the one that's owned by Twilio now.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
It was like an analytics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. So you talked to Brett about
I talked to Brett. I was actually in
on.
Austin at South by Southwest, and I had a 20-minute call with Brett. And I was like, I know what I'm doing. I guess that's the.
Like, what did he talk about? Like,
the thing I remember most is he's like, well, the best thing you can do for your career is to come work with me. And I believed him.
Yeah? Just like that?
It was basically that. That's like the very short form.
Wow.
And so I knew we would work directly together on a project, but he just kind of, sometimes you know what to say to someone, I guess. Yeah. And that was really what it hit for me.
Yeah. What was it like working with him? Initially,
it was incredibly frustrating. The thing I took away from that experience was, it was kind of a roller coaster. Kind of got down. I was like, there was a moment where I was like, should I do this? Like, is this making sense? Is this working? Is this gonna work?
Like, why specifically?
And so the thing is like I was working on a project that he had started and wanted to change some of the core product functionality in Quip that he was really passionate about. And so I kind of got handed that mission. And so, we started to come back to him with some ideas, and he would make decisions incredibly quickly about what was good and what was not. And I remember asking him at one point, I was like, well, so what's the working principle? And I mean, I was new guy, so I felt like that was a question, you might ask to learn and then come back with something that aligned to that principle. He's like, there's no principle, just that's not good. I was like, okay.
So he was kind of like a product. He was kind of like a product lead.
I mean, Brett is he's everything.
Oh, okay.
He's an omni.
So he was like very involved in the.
Oh yeah. Product development and business, and he was a phenomenal coder. He's it's ridiculous to even pigeonhole him into one of these things, but he drove a lot of the direction of the product.
Okay.
And had a lot of principles around the product development, what was good and what was not good for the product. I say it principles, he just made decisions.
Yeah.
And he was very quick at doing so and decisive. And it wasn't that you couldn't change his mind, but he was pretty right. And so I think he made decisions quickly, and he batted a very high average.
Yeah.
And the thing I learned was, okay, I had to go back to the drawing board of how I was working, not the choices I was making about the work, but how I was working so that I could work more quickly. And that meant what I actually ended up building was infrastructure so that we could do really quick testing of ideas between me and the designer and Brett. I could run it in his production instance, and he could use like non-public code, but just through like a flag, essentially. But it wasn't a flag because it had to load code. Anyway, it was kind of like a flag.
Okay.
But it was faster to deploy than our current daily deployment system. I could just deploy on demand and give him access to it without him having to do anything. And that meant that he could use the product and feel it and tell me quickly, good, bad. And so me and the designer, a guy named Matt Cahill, we were just grinding. We were grinding, but we could grind fast. And that was the secret.
Interesting.
And that's when it turned around, and we made some really interesting product changes that were super impactful, but it was enabled through infrastructure. So it's super relevant to Vercel in a sense, because when Malta joined, one of the phrases that Malta brought from, sort of a permutation of an Eric Schmidt phrase from Google, but it was that iteration velocity solves all software problems.
Yeah.
And I'm so aligned with that idea. If you can move quickly, you can make changes quickly, you can, get to good.
Yeah. So like just to recap, basically it was difficult at the beginning to work with Brett because he would just like make decisions really quickly, and
I didn't understand why.
Oh, I see. And you were like, you were just like, I don't agree with that, or
no, I just was looking for, okay, fine, well,
some kind of principle.
Yeah, something underneath so that I could work more effectively.
Yeah. Okay.
But that wasn't actually the answer.
Yeah. So why didn't? Okay. And
to work live. You had to feel things live. It wasn't like having to bring you some screenshots. It was you have to be depending on this product, and it's now changing live on you, which is a principle of experimentation that is pretty obvious. But
yeah. So I don't think we explained like what was Quip's product.
Yeah, Quip's product was it was inspired, I think, by Google Wave. Because Google Wave died, and then Brett and Kevin, after a while, they went and started. The early versions of it actually looked like Wave to me, but it's a live canvas and messaging platform for collaboration. So if you're familiar with Notion, Notion actually looked identical to Quip like when it started. It mostly just went, screenshot, build, but they took a different approach to the underlying structures. But Quip had it was a multi-person collaboration tool. So we would collaborate on a document together in real time if we wanted to, but it was really good at that.
Yeah.
And it was a feed. So, we worked in, obviously we worked on code, but you would work on a doc, explain, imagine an RFC, but you would get a feed of updates to docs so that you could follow the feed and follow what people were doing. And it was a totally different way to work. Yeah. And it was addictive. It was so good. It's not unlike Slack in that way, where if you get access to real-time information that you can go consume and do something with.
Yeah, so it's not similar to like Google Sheets or like Google Docs.
No, it's much more like Notion.
I see.
But it was really focused. The feed was really a novel thing for Quip that was changed how I worked. Like we didn't send emails.
Yeah.
It was a totally different company.
Yeah. I actually like find that funny now because like I feel like I've never actually sent many emails. Like I feel like people say like, oh, like literally everything we did was just like in a giant email thread. I'm like, I've never really had to deal with that. Yeah. I've always had to use Slack, I guess.
Lucky you.
Yeah, which is nice.
But times change.
Yeah. But anyway, so you worked on Quip. How do you think Quip would build their product if they were building it today? Like given LLMs and like
I think they'd build it a lot like Notion. I think Notion is the obvious successor to what Quip started. You have all these collaboration capabilities, but underneath it you also can do structured data within that canvas. Yeah, we had not built like databases. So Notion was like, oh, okay. And we talked about it, but Notion did it. And so that's a really, it's quite a powerful feature there. But the future of that is Notion AI. Right now you can draft things and collaborate on things using LLMs and agents directly, and then talk to it from other sources. It's a knowledge base.
Yeah. So like a lot of these things are things we do on like a day-to-day basis, right? Like writing PRDs, TDDs, things like that. And so I guess like Notion AI kind of helps you with stuff like that. Or how do you use LLMs now for helping you with things like this, like writing TDDs? Or I think you mentioned that the cost of TDDs are going to basically zero somewhere. Like what do you mean by that first?
Well, TDDs. Do you mean?
Oh, like technical design docs.
Yeah. I think. I think for agents, there's an awesome post from OpenAI 2 days ago about this, like that setting up guardrails and doing all of the hard work that we used to put off in software development. Like we'd start coding and then we'd figure these things out and like eventually get to it. You're much better off to actually do some of this planning up front. So I think technical design docs, the technical parts aren't maybe as interesting as the design parts there, because the technical parts, the means to the ends, are a little more fluid now. Like I don't care if the underlying code is written in COBOL or JavaScript really, because I might not ever read it. But what I do care about is the outcome, and that I can describe what outcomes I'm after. What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What are the shapes of things? What are the kinds of experiences that I want? I love the idea of skills, I don't know if you've seen skills.sh, but we've started to build like a marketplace so that people can distribute skills. The thing I love about it is that you can then, you could have a library of these on your computer, which has infinite storage, right? And you can be like, okay, I want to have the Apple Human Interface guidelines in the LLM's context before it goes and builds my app.
Yeah.
Like, you're not gonna build click targets that are 10 by 10. Like, you're just not gonna make these kinds of mistakes around usability or, ideally.
Yeah.
Standard mistakes like things that make things hard to use.
Yeah.
You make things that are easy to use, and if you describe what goals you're after, ideally agents will be good at, following those guides.
Yeah. I'm gonna shift the conversation, and then we'll get back to this, I guess. So when you joined Vercel, you joined in the product team?
I had not figured out what a job I would do. I just wanted to work at the company.
Okay.
And so
because of your experience at App Engine at Google?
No, just because I came here because I had an amazing customer experience. So before I came here, I'd set one guideline for myself, which was that I would go to a company where I was already voting with my wallet for that company. Not where I'd be excited about the thing they were gonna build that I might wanna buy, but something that I was already buying. And so that meant that, I had to look, it was kind of an interesting constraint, right? But I was a customer side. I didn't think about this exactly, but I sent a customer support ticket into Zeit when they were building Now V2, which was a different version of the hosting platform entirely. And my build didn't work, basically, with one of my hobby projects while I was working at Quip. I had a hobby project that would download weather data and try to tell you what the spore cast was in different locations. Like, is it a good time to find mushrooms? Because I'm a mushroom forager.
Yes,
I like to find chanterelles and porcinis and stuff. So it was like, okay, can I predict whether it's good right now? Because it's 2 hours for me to get to the coast. But if that area has had 2 inches of rain in the last 2 weeks, it's probably a good time. And it's fall. So you have this data, so you just come up with a heuristic. So it would download Weather Underground data back when they had an API, and it was this complicated cron job. And anyway, it ran on Zeit. And once my build didn't work, I wrote in and said, hey, I don't know why you would help me. I'm a pro customer, and my build doesn't work. And nobody wrote me back. I didn't get an auto reply and a case number or nothing. And I went about my day. And then later that day, I got a notification from GitHub that somebody had pushed a pull request. It's like, oh, that's cool, because it was an open source project, and that would happen from time to time. There are a few other people that liked it. But I looked, and it was a customer success engineer at Zeit who had pushed a pull request to test the build system. So I went and I looked at the diff in GitHub, and then I went and looked at the Vercel dashboard at the build log, and I could see what they were trying to do that I hadn't considered. And I wrote into support at Zeit.co, and I was like, yo, whatever you guys are doing is magical. Like, I need to come work there. That's why I came to work. And so I didn't care what job I had. And I talked to Guillermo a week or two before my start date, and he said, okay, you're going to do product.
Okay.
And I was like, great, that sounds awesome. And I hung up the phone, and I was like, what am I doing? I've never been a product manager by title. But it was but again, maybe to go back to your question about, education, I was like, well, I've done things that are product management. Like, why can't I be a product manager?
Yeah.
Cool. And so I talked to Diana Kimball, who's a friend of mine. I was like, okay, so you're the best PM I've ever worked with. What can I do? Yeah. Basically, I downloaded the Diana Kimball skill to my brain. She gave me some really concise things to think about that I still do to this day. She's like, color code your calendar, and if you're not talking to customers 30% of your week, you're failing.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's actually pretty easy to figure out, and to help me think about how to plan my time and evaluate myself.
Yeah.
And so I started as a project manager.
Yeah. And what were you working on?
Integrations.
Okay.
I was working on the integrations platform. Vercel had a pretty bespoke but interesting integration platform, but it was like nothing else out there. It wasn't like GitHub's, and I was like, okay, we're going to normalize it to be more of a pass-off auth flow, and then anyway, it was a more standardized way to build integrations with the Vercel platform, and it worked.
Okay.
It definitely worked. But also my trick was I couldn't build too much of it. I had to like spec it, design it, think about how it worked, test it out with customers, get only that far, and then I needed to hand it off to an engineer because I wasn't an engineer.
Yeah.
And so I, hired someone and had them work on it.
Okay.
And they still work here.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
You weren't a PM for long though, right?
That's true.
Yeah. Why is that?
I was a PM for about 5 months. Well, I started building something on the side.
Okay.
This is the story. Because one of the things I really wanted to build at Vercel is something quite like what is now the Vercel toolbar. The idea was you could annotate previews to say like, this is broken, this is broken. So before shipping, you could visually or textually annotate things in a preview, and then that would get shared. So basically, I was turning your previews into a Quip canvas. It was just a canvas for collaboration.
Yeah. So that was you.
That was my first side project.
I like that.
It took a while
feature.
before we shipped it because we kind of dillied into some other stuff. But then once I'd kind of built enough of it up and I demoed it, I think that was the point where she was like, okay, you're not a PM anymore. You need to go work on this.
Yeah.
I was like, and then about a month later, I had come to realize that probably the best thing I could do for the company was to actually be a manager for the Eng team and then figure out how to ship this thing through teams eventually. And so we decided to do that instead.
How would you say the role of like an Eng manager is different from a PM?
I think it depends on the kind of company you're at. Here, in both cases, the primary requirement is that you must be a builder.
To be an Eng manager?
Yeah. And to be a PM.
Yeah.
So you must be a builder. And to that end here, if you're a software engineer builder and you're getting the developer experience, you're also a product manager. Essentially, your job is to make sure that the products, the things you build for developers get used and are efficient and joyful. So that's the job of an engineer, that's the job of an eng manager, it's also the job of a product manager. I don't think we're really tightly held on swim lanes for what function you do. In some companies, like the PM talks to the customer, the engineers don't talk to the customer, the PM talks to the customer, relays that back in the form of like requirements, and then the engineer is sort of the executor, and then the PM takes it back, and you have a lot of this like shuffling stuff. But I mean, if you even think about my customer support experience, that was a builder. That was somebody who wrote code and put it up on my machine. It wasn't a, hey, I'm going to write you an email and ask you questions. So I think we're pretty, I don't think we have really sharp definitions there. But, in general, engineers primarily produce code.
Yeah.
And in general, PMs might primarily produce communications that are effective.
Yeah. How has that difference in roles changed over the last 5 years? Because I'm assuming there's been a lot of change.
It hasn't changed that much.
Really? Okay.
No, I mean, I don't think it's changed that much. I don't think we're very beholden to really strict roles here, which is great because if you want to talk to customers and you're an IC engineer on the sandbox team, it's not like it's blockaded from you. You can go sit in that channel. You can engage with our customers directly if you want to. I mean, you have to think about not doing, not distracting or doing that effectively. But if you're confident enough to do so and you're motivated, that's what ownership looks like.
Yeah.
It's a full circle relationship with the people who you're trying to help and the work you're trying to do.
I guess it also is unique that Vercel is a developer tool.
It does,
right?
yes,
So, yeah.
It doesn't. And that's another thing. When I was at Quip, I could tell that the product was really sort of turning into, okay, how do we feed the Salesforce persona? How do we build products for the Salesforce persona? And I don't have a great deal of intuition and personal experience for, the sales motion. I've never done that job exactly. I've done parts of it through advertising and things like that. But it's different. Modern SaaS sales is not a thing I have I had not been doing that. And so I wanted to work somewhere where I did have intuition. And so like, I don't have intuition for fintech.
Yeah.
You know, this is why I didn't go work at a fintech. I was like, okay, I don't do that for fun on the weekends. I don't like follow the market. So, you know, in spite of the fact that I had friends at a fintech company, it sounded really intriguing. I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that. But a developer experience tools company, I love it. And it goes back through everything I've ever done. And so I knew I had to come work here.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I want to talk about just like the engineering process and like how that's changed over the last 5 years, because I'm assuming that's changed a lot.
Well,
and if so, how?
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, you know, we don't have a really strict process.
Yeah.
That's just the thing. And so what we have now is sort of, I'd say we have principles. The principle is there isn't a process.
Okay.
There's not a, you know, if you think about like what we had to do, I mean, the reason I ended up on the App Engine team is because Google had a process that was UI review with the head of UI, you know, UX, and you either passed or failed, and you could either ship or not. If you know, there was basically, okay, you had to get on their books, go join the meeting, and if you failed, you had to come back. But you were doing 10 of these, right? Because you also had the security review. You also had the, you know, there were many functions, and you had to go like do that process. Here, where our process is more of a, you know, you can just ship things, provided you communicate about it.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have a launch calendar, and anyone, you know, you can go put anything on, anybody can put something on the launch calendar. And it's how you announce to the company that you're going to ship something. And you put a date on it. And everybody tracks the launch calendar. And if somebody wants to veto it, they can. Now, it's on you to be loud to the right people at the right times. So just putting something on the launch calendar may not be enough. If you're building a feature that changes how authentication works on the dashboard, like, you better talk to the security team unless you yourself considered yourself a security expert and you're willing to die on that hill.
Yeah.
But it does puts the onus of, you know, the responsibility back, I think, where it belongs, with the people who want to ship their things.
Yeah.
You know, it's an enabling function.
What?
So that hasn't changed that much. I mean,
Yeah.
we've changed some of the tools underneath.
yeah.
Like today it's a launch calendar. When I joined, I created something called the Living Roadmap. And it was a Notion doc
Yeah.
with dates and capacity, you know, basic capacity understanding. And it was because, you know, I was struggling to answer the question for G, be like, okay, who's working on X? And I'd be like, oh, I don't know. You would know better than me. And
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a second, we don't have a, you know, sort of an oracle of what we're doing and not doing. Because, you know, in your head, you're doing everything. But
Yeah.
in reality, you're only doing what people are working on.
Maybe another way to frame the question is, what has allowed you to start shipping 2,000 GitHub PRs, you know, a year from?
Yeah, the industry has changed.
Okay.
I mean, the act of software development has changed so fundamentally that what I learned, I think, is, you know, what I learned how to do has value, but some parts of it are irrelevant.
Like
and
what?
so, I mean, you know, among things that I did at Google, I was on the JavaScript readability admin team, which meant I could grant, my job was to grant other people the ability to approve code written in JavaScript so that it could get, merged. But if you didn't have that bit, you actually couldn't ship JavaScript to Google. You had to find somebody that had the bit. So, you know, like, that is irrelevant now. Like, we had rules like, oh, every variable must be human understandable, and, you know, you can't use variable names that are less than or equal to 3 characters.
Yeah.
I don't care about that anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody probably cares about that too much anymore. You know, as long as your, you know, agents can reasonably edit, modify, and produce good outcomes, I don't care if they're 1 character variable names.
Yeah. So how do you make sure that, like, everyone is now, well, first of all, what percentage of the code base would you say is now being written by AI versus human written?
Yeah, probably 20.
Oh, okay.
20 to 30. I mean, we're a 10-year-old company in the sense that, you know, a lot of our code was written by hand, you know, the old craft way.
Yeah.
But there's, you know, I think right now there are people who are doing 100% and people doing, you know, 20%. You know, so I don't have an exact number that I could share, but it's, you know, somewhere between 30 and 100%.
Yeah.
You know, the people working on the security platform for ingress, egress of traffic aren't just vibe coding and shipping, right? But I'm sure they're consulting, agents and LLMs in the process of producing software.
Yeah.
And that's pretty new.
Yeah. Do you guys have rules around that? Like, sending this data over to...
Yeah. I mean, we can't, we have sensitive customer data.
Yeah.
Like every enterprise customer, we're not going to just, we don't want to send PII to random AI company.
Yeah.
We don't want them training on our code, et cetera. So yeah, we have guidelines there.
Yeah. And do you guys try to use open source models, or you try to use like the Anthropic's, OpenAI?
We use what our customers use.
Okay.
I think at the end of the day, we need to understand what our customers are doing so that we can help them succeed. And some of them are using open source models, and the vast majority are using frontier models.
Yeah.
And so, we primarily use the frontier models.
Yeah. So like, how has your job changed now that like you're committing a lot of code changes?
I'm committing code changes for the sake of being more adept at guiding our teams.
Okay.
And to understand how the models work and how software engineering is changing.
Yeah.
And it's evolving. So I think for me to make good judgments and have taste in that and experience in that, I, like everybody else, kind of starting on a brand new playing field. So the only way to do it is to get on the ground and experiment and build.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. Like, what have you learned is changing right now?
Yeah, I mean, models are good, as it is today, some models are good at different things or better than others at different things. And that changes every 2 weeks at least. And so, figuring out kind of how to work with them influences how to sort of guide them. So for example, before we published skills.sh, I had been experimenting with MCPs and trying to understand what made them work well or not. Like, how much context can you put in the window to be effective, and how much is too much? At what point is it diminishing returns, or have you ruined your product by overdoing it? And I actually, I was starting to look at skills, and the point at which a couple of the frontier models adopted skills instead of just one, I was like, okay, I want to go play with this. And then I wanted to codify Guillermo's 5 principles of rich interfaces as a skill, so that I then could go run it against one of my hobby projects and see, like, oh, okay, how off base am I? And then I was like, okay, well, I'll put G's guidelines in there, and I'll put the Apple Hig in there. I'll put I'll put a bunch of stuff into the context window and then audit a project for it. I thought that sounded like a good idea, and then after doing it, like, I was like, okay, cool, I can and then it turns out we also have a modified form of that on Vercel.com called Web Design Guidelines. So then I was like, wait a second, okay, I'll use that.
Yeah.
So then I made a skill for that, and I was like, how do we distribute this? And then the next day, Xu Ding published the React best practices, which was like, an immense trove of wisdom from one of the best engineers in the world. Mm-hmm. And so, then another engineer here, Andrew Q, is like, oh, okay, well, let's skillify that, and we got to get that out. So he had already built an interface to distribute skills, and next thing we're like, oh, let's build a homepage for this stuff.
Yeah.
And we're kind of in a good position to do that, because we're not a frontier model company. So if one of the frontier models starts to distribute skills, they're going to get accused of kinds of favoritism, and we're in a more neutral place than that.
Yeah.
To do that. So that's kind of what birthed skills was, I think, curiosity for how to deliver the best developer experience. And so that's the thing that I care about for our open source frameworks, right? Like, if you're going to sit down and use one of our open source frameworks to build something, you're almost certainly going to do it with an agent right now. How do we make sure that you have the best experience possible and that your agent is effective?
Yeah.
Because you go back in time, and if you asked an agent to build you, an app, it would mostly choose Next.js, but it might choose a version that's vulnerable to something.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want that to happen. I don't want you to have that experience. So how do I make sure you don't? Or how do I make sure it produces a version of a product that matches the architecture for the thing you want to build? Mm-hmm. And so, that's a way of tuning your agent accordingly to really understand Next in details, or Nuxt, or to make a good choice there.
Mm-hmm. How would you say building with agents is different for like one of your side projects versus building in a giant code base like Vercel? And how do you guys try to make it consistent so that not every engineer is doing like something totally different, or do you even care that they have different practices?
I don't. I think we're still in a letting flowers bloom phase largely. Like I don't think we've answered all the questions about the best ways to interact with agents programmatically. There are people who like working in IDE-like experiences. A lot of people who like using terminals, terminals with browsers embedded, and all of these things are, I think, fun to play with. And at the end of the day, we treat a lot of the things we build internally the same way we treat building for external people. Like, does it get adoption? Are people using it? Are they depending on it? Would they punch you in the face if you tried to take it away from them? Is it really a painkiller or is it a vitamin? Those are kind of standard ways to think about it. And so we look at usage of the things we're building internally. We have a really strong culture of making sure that we don't ship something that we don't use. Because we're a web company. We're a back-end company. We're a front-end company. We're a marketing, we have all these functions. And if we're going to ship something to the world that we don't depend on, it's going to struggle. So that's our bar. And it's high. It's a high bar. It means that if you're going to build something that you think will appeal to marketers, the question is, does Keith Messick depend on it? And if he doesn't, you're done.
I see. That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that was true. Google had famously gotten, the dog fooding branding was a big part of Google's culture.
That makes sense.
And so that's a thing that, we take seriously too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then a little addendum to your question about what's enabled. There was nothing that enabled or disabled me from writing code at any given time. I mean, again, my job isn't, managers don't write code, they do X. Like, it is not written down anywhere. And in fact, I would be disappointed if we ever tried to write things down that were like that. It's just that for me now, I need to understand this landscape. So it's just my personal belief that I need to do this to understand how to help our teams.
And probably it would have taken you a lot longer to write the same code that you're doing now.
Oh, for sure. But I wouldn't have done it. Like, that's the point. I wouldn't have written that code because that would have been an incredible time suck, and I wouldn't have learned. It's not like the Dev 3000, the product is a thing I care immensely about, its growth or something. I don't. What I care about is that now I have a place to test skills distribution and skills on things and think about how to help agents succeed for our customers.
I'm going to shift the conversation a tiny bit. Have you noticed that the engineers' technical ability has been atrophying now that they're not actually writing code?
No.
Okay.
No, because technical ability is, a very, you chose the words, and what I'll say is your technical ability is your ability to transform technology into something useful. That has not atrophied. I think your question is more along the lines of if, are people's fundamental understanding of computer science, is it going to, become less important and then will, gravitate towards the means of idiocracy or something? And I don't think so. I'm more excited about the new grad cohort than I've ever been. And I think that's a function of the fact that, today, if you come into our code base, you can onboard so much more quickly. If you don't know how a Bloom filter works, you would have struggled before, and you will continue to struggle because you will guide an agent towards the wrong solution by trying to describe what you want it to do, and it'll follow your words. And if you're not aware of kind of the building blocks that you can take advantage of, you're going to move more slowly. And that's always been true.
So I guess what's the next abstraction?
I'm certain that it has to do with how we work with with agents alongside us, how we orchestrate, how we collaborate, how we share. I think the thing that worries me is if the creator of Ghosty is a guy named Mitchell Hashimoto. He built HashiCorp, and then I think a lot of engineers use Ghosty right now because it's a terminal. It's cool. It's got a lot of qualities that are really nice. One of Guillermo's first projects was a terminal for Zeit. But anyway, terminals are always a cool endeavor. He wants to just not accept pull requests. on Ghosty, because he can't handle the combination of, like, you can't tell, is it a human, is it slop, is it just AI, is it somebody just messing with you, are they DDoSing you essentially? Are you spread beyond your own means? And I think that you can imagine a world where we don't collaborate as much because of it, and I think that's a thing that would be terrible.
Yeah.
A lot of the greatest things come from collaboration, and I'm certainly excited about enabling individuals to do more, but we do more together, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that kind of remains to be seen.
I'm actually curious, like, I'm assuming you've heard of Warp, like the Warp terminal. Yep. Why do people like Ghosty better than Warp? I'm just curious.
Developer experience.
Okay.
The experience. I don't know if you used Warp.
I use Warp, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about switching, but I don't know, like, what's the reason to?
Well, Warp is a product
in
a much broader sense, and it's a very it has a lot of niceties that Ghosty doesn't have. It doesn't try to enable you to use agents or anything like that. It's much more traditional terminal.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's probably because the frontier models have all built agents that run in terminals that you're no longer comparing. You're comparing using Warp to using Claude Code, whereas Ghosty, you can use Claude Code, Cursor, and Gemini, Cursor CLI, all these things. It's sort of like I think it's just a different abstraction. But I haven't used Warp since its early days, so I can't really say.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that, is it Guillermo or Guillermo?
Yeah,
Guillermo. Yeah. So I think, like, his vision is that in the future, like, all websites or web applications are going to be built for you and personalized for you, like, on the fly. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
Yeah, I think I might frame it a little differently. I think interfaces and ways of solving problems will be extremely dynamic and understand your preferences. You can already see this in terms of, if you use Gemini, the Google product, it knows a lot of things about you. And so it's personalizing the responses it's giving you based on prior chats, based on your email content, based on your persona. So it's already started. And then the other version of that is, okay, I want to buy tickets on United. It knows what part of the plane you want to sit in. Today we go and click into a bunch of buttons and things, but I don't think anybody's dying to load the seat picker.
Yeah.
And it's not like the idea is that it dynamically puts a seat picker in front of you to go do. That's one version of what we used to showcase with, like, LLMs and embedding apps inside of them. But I think it's more interesting than that. I think that the means of outcome will sometimes be a user interface that you need to tap around, and sometimes it will just be, hey, I got you a flight to New Orleans tomorrow at 7 a.m. You're in, row 22A, it's an aisle. Are you good with that? Good.
Yeah. So you see, like, because I don't view that as like a web application then at that point, right?
Yeah, but it's going over TCP IP. It's a web application by every definition of a web application.
Just the experience is different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the user experience. Yeah. So that's why I say, I think websites will continue to exist, but I think you might do different things with them. Humans consume information visually in ways that are interesting. Like, if you're clothes shopping for shoes online, did you ever need to see size 4? It's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Why? Why do you go to the filter bar on the side to pick stuff?
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous, right?
Yeah. If that's the case, then what is Vercel in 5 years?
Vercel's the transport layer
for
this. You're going to have to build these capabilities for your company and for your employees, and that's an infrastructure challenge, and it's a delivery challenge, and it's you're going to need underpinnings for that technology that work well and scale to zero, essentially. And that was the thing about serverless and autoscaling, going back to App Engine, that's so great. You're not building a computer that you have to turn on and leave on all the time and do nothing with. It's really on demand and cost effective utility.
Okay.
And so we're building the means by which you'll ship those things.
And how are you shifting your product strategy, if at all, to accommodate that, if that's the goal 5 years from now?
Yeah, It's to make sure that you can build those things,
Yeah.
and they are cost effective, and that they have the kind of security and capabilities. Security meet the security requirements, so you're not leaking things.
Yeah.
They're safe. They're not, they're protected, and they work really well. And they're a joy to work on and iterate on. These things are true. Security is a default, and you're alerted if something's off immediately in terms of your spend. That you're like, okay, I only want to spend $100 on this thing. I only have $100. I'm a student, and I'm trying a new thing among my peers. I'm not gonna foot a $10,000 bill because I built something for my university that goes viral. How do you make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I think Guillermo said that he's starting to not identify himself as a coder anymore. Do you view that the same way?
I'm a builder.
Yeah,
I'm a builder.
Okay,
and he is too.
Yeah. So how do you think the engineering discipline should be, or software engineering specifically, should be referring to itself now? Is it still software engineering, or is it now everyone's a PM, or what?
I think it's. I mean, if you take the word engineer, my idea of engineer was schematics designers and architects, and and then when it was applied to software. When I got my first job title of software engineer, when it was previously webmaster, it felt very professionalized. Yeah. And I think that these are just words. They mean whatever you think they mean. I believe that your ability to build things that save people time and doing so efficiently is the skill. And so you can call that engineering, you can call that product development, you can call that building. But ultimately, code is a means to an end, and as LLMs and AI get exceptionally good at using those tools, it doesn't mean that your knowledge of how code works is irrelevant. It's actually super relevant because it's one of the tools. Mm-hmm. But you also have to communicate. Karpathy says English is the most important programming language. If you're not good at writing and reading, you're going to struggle just as much as if you're not good at understanding algorithms and data structures. You have to understand all of these things. And I think, maybe to tie back to the beginning of our conversation, you're limitless. You contain multitudes, if you know this kind of, it's a music reference. It's not one thing. You are all of these things. And your sense of accomplishment and success should be driven by what matters to you.
Well, thank you. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.